So the last of the uncommon assertions, he says the extreme of existence. How do you avoid the extreme of existence? What does the extreme of existence mean? Of course. I knew you'd like that. How do you avoid falling into the misconception of inherent existence? Through
analysis that would show that there is no inherent existence.
So, through emptiness, through realization of emptiness. So, extreme of existence and of non-existence, means of avoiding, I guess, if we take extreme to mean conceptual, realize emptiness, right? Now, and to avoid the extreme non-existence, dependent arising. One way of saying it is, you see, is appearance. None way, well. And then, well, what Tomova does is, if you really understand appearance well, you can avoid the extreme of existence. Nangwe yota sawakan. Nangwe yota sawakan. And so, in other words, you take this standard format and just turn it around. Dongbe, yota sawakan. Because emptiness, when you delimit the object of negation merely to inherent existence, you, through realizing emptiness, avoid the extreme of non-existence.
Is that because you're able to posit mere existence after you realize?
Yes, because all that you're refuting is inherent existence. Now, of course, we started the class with searching for motion, going, and we got so that making some progress on emptiness left us no way to posit appearance or existence, right? Now, somehow our analysis was refuting too much. But just what it isn't refuting is unclear. So to get to the point where, through emptiness, you avoid the extreme of non-existence, must be very difficult. Easy to say, very difficult to know. That the compatibility of emptiness and dependent arising is central to the system, I think, is unchallengeable, be it India or Tibet. Okay. And we don't need to. If we go back and review the whole thing, we'll have to repeat all the topics the way we did it before. Okay. So, it's been fun for me to read this because I put so much time into it so many years ago. I taught it in much more detail than even is in here, believe it or not, about 10 years ago. And It's been a while since I have. It's not every night when I go to bed, I don't just go through this particular debate. However, I haven't lately.
Did you teach an entire class on this 10 years ago, or was this just part of it?
Yes, it took a couple years, in fact. We read it in Tibetan. We read Giant Sheva's presentation in Tibetan. And one thing I was trying to do in that phase, which was 10 years after doing this book, was, in which I purposely didn't do in this book, was, let's see, in this book, I'm giving a Gelugpa run on everything. I don't step back and say, but Chandragiri doesn't quite look like this. I don't do it too often. Whereas in our day-by-day reading, must have been for 2 years, 10 years ago, and reading Giant Sheva himself, it then was, you had plenty of opportunities for showing that, is Chandragiri really saying this? And point out the layers that are being added in. It was a lot of fun, we had a good time. Although, as Jules, I think, said, it was only afterwards that I understood what I was doing. And I wanted to say, what was I doing?
Tell me that.
Then I'll know for next time. But
Do you plan to publish that?
yes, it's been, that was all recorded, and Than typed up most of it a couple years ago. And I've been reading it lately. It's very interesting to read. I'm really happy it was recorded, and because, you know, I was right on top of the topic, and it recalls it like, oh yeah. And then I also with Betsy, I did the section on Haktong Chemo on the same material. And that Derek typed up, and I have not even read that transcript yet. So, Buddhapalita said some strange things. Where's the entire, where is it, Buddhapalita's entire statement? 460. So I was thinking of doing today is to start with looking at Buddhapalita's entire statement. Commentaries are often made, you know, why does somebody say something? And so they put, like the person in the street, here in the very beginning, here someone says, show how this is, which is called production is only a convention. It's like, why did Nāgārjuna write the first chapter of the treatise in the middle? What is he responding to? What's the context? And somebody wants to know, well, you say everything's empty. In your first stanza, you said you gave the 8 no's. In China, they're known as the 8 no's. I forget what the Chinese is for 8 and no. N-O. When I saw it the other day, I thought, oh, is that right? The 8 no's. No, it says there's no cessation, no production, no coming, no going, no sameness, no difference, right? That's the, in the expression of worship section. And thus, the first chapter, Buddhapalita is saying, comes out of Nāgārjuna's feeling that somebody wants to know, well, how do you establish that production is just a convention? So that's why Buddhapalita says here, someone says to Nāgārjuna, show how this which is called production is only a convention. Now that Giant Sheva, you see, a lot of this discussion comes from Tsongkhapa's Haktong Chemo, his great discourse on Vipassana, great insight, long section. And then other people went on to flesh out what Tsongpa was saying. And Jaya Sheva is the only one who draws attention to this initial line. It's quite interesting that he does, because I think it's so important. And it's because what Buddhapalita is saying is very odd. Because emptiness is supposed to be a non-affirming negation. And through these reasonings, you're not establishing that production is only a convention. You're establishing that production does not inherently exist. You're establishing emptiness. Thal mayin, shen min, yi mayin, gyu min. Ngabo kanda kangnayan, gyewa namyan, yer mayin. There's nothing about exist conventionally. There's not a word. Now, it's true that in the Madhyamaka system, production exists conventionally. But in the first chapter, it's hard to find anything that says, and therefore production exists conventionally. This is important because what are the reasonings getting at? What are the reasonings getting you into? What state are they putting you into? Where is the, if you read some literature, the literature puts your mind in a certain state, unless you're a Buddhologist, right? And the scene, the vocabulary, whatever, you end up in a state. And so what are the reasonings doing? They're putting you into a state, what's being sought is nyamcha yeshe. Meditative it's realizing emptiness. And in that state, supposedly, or maybe this is to be challenged, nothing appears but emptiness. Not the objects. You see, we're talking about the last time about the defilements that prevent direct cognition of both types of object of knowledge simultaneously. You don't get rid of them until Buddhahood. And thus, it's really the fault of our consciousness that when you directly perceive emptiness, you can't perceive phenomena. But you're trying to take the medicine of emptiness, that things don't exist in this concrete way that they think you do, and thus you just pay attention to that absence. You're not paying attention to the fact that production exists conventionally, which is positive. Or at best is an affirming negative, the refuting that inherently exists, and the positive side realizing that it exists conventionally. Now, why this is so important is because of the state of meditative equipoise. In meditative equipoise, is there appearance or isn't there? Appearance of conventional objects. Now, in fact, this was, in the 14th century in Tibet, this was a hot topic. Tsongpa earlier on in his life said that Nyamsha was nangje. I think we've talked about this, I'm not certain. And in the later part of his life, he felt it was nangme. And then the whole of his tradition went to nangme. That the direct perception of emptiness is such that for people like us, for non-Buddhas, the appearance of objects is impossible. There can be all sorts of consciousnesses in between where the one perception is affecting the other, but when you actually non-dualistically realize emptiness, all that is appearing is empty. Now, Bhāviveka, for instance, this vocabulary non-affirming negative, comes out of Mimamsa, at least this is how people have traced it. And even in Buddhist texts, things like Tamse, which is Brahmse, which is Brahman, Chang Mitungwa, shouldn't drink beer, is not suggesting that they should drink something else. It's taken for granted they're going to drink something else, you see? And so that is called a non-affirming prohibition, you see? not suggesting something else. And so by the time, of Madhyamaka Buddhism, whatever, these mere negatives are being called, Paryudasa Pratisheda and, come on, Jeffrey, Prasajya Pratisheda. Prasajya Pratisheda is non-affirming negative, and Paryudasa Pratisheda is affirming negative. I remember it because the second letter of Paryudasa is A, so affirmative. Mega and Mainga. Mega and Mainga. Now that in the Tibetan word suggests that, doesn't it, by the very name, a me type negation and a Mayan type negation, you see? But in fact, there's no correlation between every me type is a non-affirming negative and every Mayan is an affirming negative. It's just a way of translating. Turns out. So, whereas in Mimamsa, and I don't know if it has any wider meaning in Mimamsa, but I doubt it, it has to do with what, ethical and behavioral prohibitions? You shouldn't do this, which suggests you should do some other thing. So that's an affirming prohibition. Okay? Bhāviveka extensively talks about affirming and non-affirming negations or negatives. The Dalai Lama's person suggested to me the term negative, because you see, it's the object. It's not it's an object, it's a phenomena. Emptiness is a mega. And you could understand non-affirming negation that way, but negative brings home the idea even more strongly. This is back when his English was awful. It's very interesting that in the midst of its being awful, he had an interesting suggestion. Now, Bhāviveka uses the terms mega and mainga and Prasajya Pratisheda and Paryudasa Pratisheda. I don't know as Buddhapalita does. I don't think he does. I only assume that Chandrakirti does. There's a word list of the Prasannapada done by
Yamaguchi.
Yamaguchi? That could be.
It's called Word Index.
Yes. Anyway, it's distinctly odd that Buddhapalita is saying this. As if Nāgārjuna is showing that production is only a convention. Only would eliminate inherent existence. So this would be a mainga, an affirming negative. There's an elimination in the word only, and then with convention, there's something positive. It's truly odd. So Chandrakirti's defense is, well, he said that, but he didn't really mean it that way. As you say, if it's somebody on your side, you treat them very kindly and posit their thought and interpret their thought in a very nice way. And if it's somebody who's on the other side, you hold them to every little word. So you see, this was the trigger for Bhāviveka's objecting to Buddhapalita's, what Buddhapalita had written. And Janasheva so nicely points out that, well, this is rather well-founded. There's good reason. And he says, that is shown in the first stanza. Well, Hopkins adds in the first stanza. But that's shown with, and then he gives what I just gave in Tibetan. Dale Mayan Shenle. Nile Mayan, Gumim, Nobo Kanda, Kanaya, Gyawananya, Yermani. Concerning this, if some things are produced, consider whether the production of those things from self, from other, from both self and other are causelessly. Upon examination, it's not feasible. Production is not feasible in all these ways. From self is synonymous with or equivalent to from its own entity. Dakle is the same as probably Danyile. About that, respectively. Respectively indicates there's going to be a series of negations. These are not produced from their own entities because, so things are not produced from their own entities. Now you see, Bhāviveka thought, up at the beginning you said, I'm going to show me how production is only a convention. Thus, when Buddhapalita gives just the negative, things are not produced from their own entities, the suggestion is they are produced from other.
This is
So you see,
the classic example is either a king or a Brahmin, and it's not a Brahmin.
I guess so. I guess so, by context. They're not produced from their own entities. So you see, we have the question of the reversal of the thesis and of the reason. And it's very hard to understand at first why Bhāviveka felt that for Buddhapalita himself, his own statement of the thesis needed to be reversed. Reversed from they're not produced from self to they are produced from other. Transhiva points out it's because of that very first line. And that's super, you know? When you spend years going on this material and you finally find an answer like that, say, that's great. And if you're a crumb, you don't tell other people and you make them sweat for 2 years the way you did. After 2 years, you tell them, and they say, who cares? A lot of scholarship and teaching is done on the basis of, I'm going to make you suffer the way I did to learn this stuff that really doesn't mean anything. And whereas scholarship moves forward, when you know, if you figure out something, you get some quick way of conveying it to other people so they can do something else with it. Why not? It's Gidon Lotra in his book, Walking Through Walls, says the greatest difficulty for a scholar to meditate is arrogance. Arrogance that thinks you know something. Oh yes, you know this, you know that. And here you are faced with this very dumb mind that you can't hold one way or another. So is the cure to not study anything? No, it's to overcome the arrogance. So part of the arrogance is, it's sort of a weird form of arrogance to want other people to suffer the way you suffered. You see? Even for minor points.
Is he saying also that is it more difficult to actually get it once you know it intellectually? Do they go into that?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the meaning. But you don't even know it intellectually. You know how to put the words together. That isn't even intellectual. He's not producing their own entities because, and he didn't say their production again, punar utpada or yang gyawa, he just said gyawa. Hopkins is added in there again from what comes down below, okay? But he put it in brackets because he was fed up with Travatsky, who added in all sorts of things that weren't in bracket. I didn't tell you he was adding them in. Because their production is just senseless. Well now, according to, when Bhāviveka reads this, the production of things is senseless, does he think Buddhapalita agrees with this or not? No. So that's why you have to reverse the reason. Production is sensible.
That's what confused me the most. he was reading one thing, he said, but probably he didn't mean this, he meant something else. And he's saying he means something else, and then he refutes that, and he was.
Well, that's why I'm going through this today. Because their production would be just senseless. Would be, though. You see, if they were produced from self, their production would be senseless. If they were produced from self, their reproduction would be senseless. The first production, according to the Sankhya, is when it attains its existent entity, unmanifest. You've got clay, right? And in the clay is a pot. But before the particles of clay gathered by that riverside, was there a pot by the riverside? No. At some point, the pot, the unmanifest pot, comes into existence. Very hard to posit when that is, isn't it? And then, when the potter works on it, the pot becomes manifest, correct? So there's, in a sense, two productions. One is to gain an existent entity, unmanifest, and the others become manifest. So in fact, the production of the unmanifest, the making of the unmanifest manifest, is sensible to a Sankhya. Is sensible. So from a Madhyamaka point of view also, production isn't senseless. It's sensible. And because production would be endless, no, same thing isn't produced over and over again. So production is finite, is what the Madhyamaka herself believes, right? But if things were produced from self, if they were produced from self, they would have to be produced endlessly, wouldn't they? If it was already existent and manifest, if it was made manifest again, the exact thing, same thing reduplicated, exact. I have to go on forever.
Jeffrey, I think the example you brought up the other day in Bill's reading about waking up and reproducing yourself. Jeffrey used the example that sometimes he has the experience of, if I'm saying this correctly, of replicating himself exactly as he is again and again and again. And that's how he has this continuum called Jeffrey Hopkins.
Right.
So that's how you are, this continuum called Jeffrey Hopkins. And that would be an example of something that is produced from self once, therefore produced from self indefinitely.
The exact same.
Exactly the same.
You know, if you ask me, is it the exact same? You know, I might say no, but my own sense is exact same as a moment ago. So if I could replicate myself exactly, if you could do it once, it would be, and there was some need for it, it could go on forever. And I think that's why we're so frightened when we become sick or old or undergo an accident. We think, well, I didn't think that could happen to me. Why? Because you were replicating, you thought you were replicating yourself all the time. You weren't. You had to take some dramatic hitting over the head to realize that you were never replicating yourself. It was different every moment. If a radio, for instance, replicated itself exactly as it was in the former moment, it would never grow old, right? It would never wear out, right? And if it could replicate itself from one moment to the next, exactly.
Exactly seems to be what attention.
Oh, of course.
Does it that somehow is logically implied in self-production that it wouldn't change?
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guess,
So if something that was already produced, you know, somebody goes out and works in the field all fall and so forth, all summer, to get some harvest, right? You do a lot of work to cause something newly to be produced. It's not a case of just something things replicating themselves out there. But what was sort of a shock to me the other day was, well, that's, as I was reading the transcript from the one 10 years ago, is, oh, that's what I'm doing. You know, this production from self. I just feel I'm replicating all the time. You know, not replicating in that you're looking at, oh, that's the old Jeffrey and this is the new one. It's just, oh, that it is just the one thing there all the time.
Right.
Whereas I have a bit more, when I wake up, the sense of the recreation of the same one that was there before, and thus I would use a word like reduplicate.
Oh, right.
But reduplicate. And if you didn't do it, as I was saying the other day, you know, like from the events I've had and so forth, where you can't put yourself back together again. You're a mess. But to be deceived to the point where you think you're reduplicating yourself is quite a different matter, I think. There's some, I think there's a sense of that it's easier to live if you deceive yourself into thinking you're reduplicating. But it's because the other side would be total chaos, but I don't think the middle, you know, I think there's a middle. And that's neither of those, the total chaos or the sense that you're exactly the one who was there before. So I think quite often Dakye appears to be something that we don't experience or believe in or have much to do with. And my shock the other day was, oh my, this is probably what I think I'm doing all the time, you know, or it is. Or when my mind wouldn't come back together, I was hoping to get back to the state where that deception would work. So now you see, this is his brief statement. Things are not produced from their own entities because their production is just senseless and because production is endless, or would be. And then this is his longer statement. It is thus. You see, he words the same thing again. He says the production again. You see, this time he says again. Of things already existing in their own entity is purposeless. Also, well, if though existent they are produced, they would never not be produced. Hence, that also is not asserted. Therefore, respectively, things are not produced from self. It's, I think Chandrakirti is quite right that there's an airtight argument here. And especially if you disregard the first sentence about Nāgārjuna is going to show you that production's only a convention, or relegate it to just some general statement about the Madhyamaka system, as opposed to what these reasonings are proving. That you have to be hung up. If somebody later, if you say production again in the second statement, then you ought to carry that back to the previous statement. You can't be stupidly literal. It's like in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Well, for instance, the Heart Sutra says, oh, I don't know, something like Suk Ranshingi Mebar Tao. It says Ranshingi. And then later on it just says Meba, 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 Meba. It says if in that text, or in a text of the same type, it says Ranshingi, Ranshingi is to be carried over everywhere else. And that makes sense. That makes sense. So then he goes on, self, other, both. And look, when he finishes it, top of page 461, he says, therefore, this called production is only a convention. He says it again. He meant to say it. You know, just before he says, since production of things is thus in all ways, in these four ways inadmissible, there's no production. Therefore, this called production is only a convention. Now, Look at what Bhāviveka says. Isn't it stunning? On page 461, there are these, what I've rendered as 2 paragraphs. That's it. About this one who was other. It's excessively cute, isn't it? Makes the explanation. Things not produced from their own entities because their production is just innocence, because production is the endless. For instance, in that reason, the reason means because if they were produced from self, their production would be just senseless and would be endless, right? So within the reason, you understand they're not produced from self, right within the reason. They're not produced from self because production is sensible and has an end. You realize the whole thing right within the reason. So what's your thesis? There isn't anything left to be put in the thesis. So, Bhāviveka is saying, you didn't state your syllogism or your consequence well. Your syllogism. Big deal. That is not suitable. One, because the one who is other does not express a reason as well as an example. And that's all he says. He never tells you how. He never lays it out. Isn't it wild? This is Indian Buddhism. This is how it was done. You didn't tell people these things. You wrote these cryptic statements. And then orally, Bhāviveka says to Jnanagarbha, make sure, you only tell us the right person. When Lodro Rinpoche was coming to the United States to teach here, he was teaching Salam in the 70 Topics, which is a distillation of the meaning of Maitreya's ornament for clear realization. Gurindogyan, Abhisamaya Alankara, into 70 topics. It's a type of study that's done just after doing Dutra, Lorik, Darik, you do Tyendunju in order to begin the study of Gurindogyan. You get sort of a picture of the whole thing. It almost drives you crazy if you don't already know something about emptiness. Because you're doing this whole stretch of 70 topics, sort of swimming around out there. I happened to do it when I'd already done a lot of this study, and it was thrilling, unbelievably thrilling. But I've never met anybody else for whom it was thrilling. Because I think they ought to do Uma before they do Parching. They spent 6 years on Parching. And the mind is almost destroyed at the end of 6 years. Nothing left to think about it. All the bites have been used up, It's just been packed. In Tuten Gyatso in New Jersey, they spent 6 years on Dutra in Dashikil in Amdo. And by the end of I felt by the end of the 6 years, all of his bites had been used up. They're all full. He needed more storage. There wasn't any chance for storage left.
So you would study Parching before Druta?
No, I would study Dutra, Lori. I'm not sure when to do Darik. And I would do Trumta and Salam, and then do Uma. Trumta, short Trumta, Salam, and then do Uma. Because Salam, you see, is parching rendered in a different form. And then go right into Uma, find out what you're meditating on, emptiness. And then when you've gotten some progress on that, then it's possible to go back and do paths in a much broader way. But that's, who am I to say? That's, really, I'm not. I'm often extremely arrogant, but, they've done it for centuries this way, and a whole lot of people hate it and think it's wrong, but it's still going. Whereas
Like
mine,
Landon and Whitney,
what?
kind of like Landon.
Oh yeah, mine would probably last for 2 years or 5 years, and then everybody would disperse. Because the one who was other does not express the reasons well as an example, because he does not avoid the fallacies adduced by another. My God. Fallacies deduced by another, you could guess it was the Sankhya we're talking about, Dakya, right? But what are the fallacies? He gives not a word, does he or does he? And because his words afford an opportunity, oh great. They afford an opportunity. They give other people a chance. Give other people a chance to get on you, right? But that's what afford an opportunity means. Get the better of it. Because, and he does say something, because since now Hopkins adds in the thesis and the reason, but it must be reversed from what is explicitly stated. What emerges is the opposite of thesis and reason. Oh, that's okay, thesis and reason is right there. That things are produced from other because production is fruitful and because production has an end, due to which you would contradict tenets, meaning Madhyamaka tenets. Now it's a question, even his commentator, Avalokita, whom I noticed in reading, at least one of my teachers said he was not the direct student. And that my teacher had thought Jnanagarbha was. I have no clue. What is the tenet, Madhyamaka tenet, that's contradicted? Is it that things are produced from other because production is fruitful and because production has an end? Does holding that contradict Madhyamaka tenets? Is that the tenet that's contradicted? Or is it because he holds that, some other tenet is contradicted? Now, Tsongpa and Jaya Sheva and so forth say that it's the tenet that emptiness is a non-affirming negative is being contradicted. I think that's very smart. Now, what I think is so exciting about this, really, is that these people are not out there repeating. How long could you repeat this? If you were just memorizing something, Buddhapalita's section, Bhāviveka's section, they're exploring it, trying to figure out what's going on. It's just tremendous. So as Joe Wilson was saying, the study of Trumta, Siddhanta, he was saying is not doxography. Doxography, he was joking. It was great because I first heard the word doxography from Joe. He says Trumta, doxography, or he used just doxography, and I thought, what's he talking about? Oh, Trumta, huh? He says even when you use the word doxography to philosophers, people in philosophy departments, at least half of them have never heard the word, don't know what it means, which is what I thought when Joe brought it up. Why go to some fancy word? But for him anyway, doxography is like where you're just taking a variety of opinions like Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita, and so forth, and saying, this is it. And you're listing 10 assertions, no proof, not drawing you into a system, a mode of a worldview, a mode of thinking, and applying it back and forth, but just bare assertions almost in order to remove the diversity. And I'd have to get his paper to reconstruct what he was saying. And he was saying, well, let's not call Trumta doxography. We might be able to call the Kunjujimi Ombo Trumta, that, as he said, Jeffrey translated, doxography. I think that's pretty true. And of course, I've just written an article about the genre of doxography. doxography is like, it's systems, but it's bare systems. It's not for the sake of drawing you into a worldview and using it, but of just like a catechism of, a dead catechism, like dead Trumta, the difference between dead Trumta and live Trumta. And I think what we've been doing, I hope, for some of you anyway, is live Trumta. You know, it's like your being angry is part of live Trumta. You're using the system, and that's how you gain anything from it, by trying to move into the worldview, and moving into the worldview doesn't mean that it fits. How did I get off on this? Oh yes, what is the tenet? Now, Avalokiteshvara says that it's just what the tenet itself is, that things are produced from other. Whereas Tsongkhapa, because Bhāviveka earlier in his own text talks so much about mega, manga, and emptiness is just mega, what he's got in mind is it's the tenet that emptiness is just a mega. And once you see how briefly Bhāviveka speaks, it makes tremendous sense to go search in his text and find out what's going on. Now, I next give Avalokiteshvara, who for the most part is tiringly repetitious. You know, it's like if you hadn't understood Bhāviveka, it's well worth to read Avalokiteshvara. After you read him, you will know the grammar of Bhāviveka's statement. And it's good, very helpful that way. And, you know, it's got more than that. I'm, I guess, dumping on it because there are other more detailed expositions. Now, one, of course, wonders when somebody, how many ever centuries or decades and so forth later, decides to defend Buddhapalita against Bhāviveka. You know, immediately you wonder, well, you know, were they from the same club, and is there some family connection, or is he so much down on Bhāviveka for whatever reason that he is searching around for somebody to defend? I've never come up with anything. I've never heard of anybody come up with anything. Lindner used to say something like, well, poor Bhāviveka, he couldn't respond. Well, I mean, as if that was a reason why Chandrakirti shouldn't refute him. I thought that was, come on, you know, that's going too far. He's defending Bhāviveka, you see, by saying, well, Chandrakirti shouldn't have refuted him because Bhāviveka was no longer alive to refute him. I mean, the world would go dead. What do you say? Time in the history of ideas isn't that ridiculously linear, is it?
Not around here.
Ideas of quite some long time ago have a presence. And it's as if they're on a shelf that is contemporaneous in some sense, rather than you're reaching way back, you know? Because you've got means for constructing that worldview right here and now. And I always think that Lindner was not realizing this. So Chandrakirti, I mean, what's he saying? He's saying things like, why are you so uptight, right? Consequences are sufficient, right?
For the intelligence.
Yeah, for the intelligence. And over the years, I keep coming back to his being upset with Bhāviveka's insistence on syllogisms. Insistence. It's like, it really is, why are you so uptight? And what does that indicate about you? That you insist on the syllogism. I almost think that this indicates, there's one place where he sees a different view of emptiness, really. Because these two sections are called, when you study which means Umala, which means also Tsongkhapa's commentary, which means your own yikcha, yikcha. That is Madhyamaka, but it's the Madhyamaka of Madhyamaka thal. It's not Madhyamaka in general. So it's not Swatantrika. Swatantrika is studied mainly when you look at Nundoki, watching the ornament for clear realization. So since it's Chandrakirti's text, is the Prasanga. Within that, one of the topics is thal, reversing the consequences. You see, because production would be senseless and would be endless. Reversing those two telwa, which are found in the because clause. They happen to be in the because clause. And then this goes on when once Chandrakirti gets finished with discussing Bhāviveka's reversing of the consequences, he goes on to talk about Chögyeng Tunno. Common appearance of the subject. And his accusation is that Bhāviveka incorrectly accepts that there is Chögyeng Tunno. That Madhyamaka should not accept Chögyeng Tunno. Common appearance of the subject. So, if I'm a Madhyamaka and you're a non-Madhyamaka, or the other way around, and we're going to debate about this, talk about this table, discussion about this table, in order to right our own ideas. I mean, that's our contract. Our contract is not just to maintain the idea that we always had, but to be hip, and change your view. Does this table appear similarly to you and to me?
I thought they were saying no.
We're saying no, but does it? We have to figure out, what does common appearance of the subject mean? Because unless I'm a Buddha, it appears to me to be inherently existent. It appears to you to be. So, if that's what Chögyeng Tunno meant, that it just appears in the same way to you as to me.
Doesn't it seem to have to be asserted by the systems
Yes.
to be pure,
Now,
to appear somewhere?
Now, asserting, so then it goes to in the systems of the two proponents. Something about in the system, that's where that comes. I'm delighted you noticed. Because as I was reading it, I thought, how could anyone notice this? I say it 2 or 3 times, but it should be in huge letters. In the systems, what? In the system of the non-prasanga, do objects appear to inherently exist? Yes! In the system of prasangas, do objects appear to inherently exist? Buddhas? Yes! So then you got judging to know again. Are you with me?
In the system, they appear to inherently exist.
According to the system, right?
Everyone but Buddhas, they appear to inherently exist.
Yes, in Prasangika, right?
Sure.
They say that. And in the non-Prasangika systems, since they accept inherent existence, they say things that appear to inherently exist and do inherently exist. In the Prasangika system, they say things appear to inherently exist but don't. But so then it's still Chujintuna, subject appears similarly. So in the system is right, but it cannot just be that in those systems,
They're established.
yes, in the systems of the two parties, they're established similarly. That means if we're going to debate about the table, the Prasangika has a valid cognition that establishes, that just certifies that there's a table. And in my system, it certifies merely the existence of the object. Whereas in your system, it certifies the inherent existence of the object. So that, in the end, is what Church-in-Tunor comes down to mean, that in the system of both of the disputants, the subject and so forth are certified by valid cognition similarly in the systems. Because in fact, the Prasangika says, you have a valid cognition of the table that certifies its existence. And I do too. But you see, in your system, as opposed to how you actually are, you hold that it certifies its inherent existence. Now, of course, Bhāviveka didn't go around saying, I assert inherent existence. This had to be read into, seen in what he was saying. Because it's claimed that Bhāviveka is somebody who cannot tell the difference between inherent existence and existence. So when Bhāviveka talks about existence, he'll be meaning inherent existence. From the point of view of somebody who can separate the two, he can't separate the two. So when he says existence, he means inherent existence. Of course, if we're reading him right, there have to be signs of this, right? This is not like saying, Shmo's house, is it green or blue, right? One person has this opinion, one person has that opinion. We both know what green and blue are, you can choose one or the other. Or is Bill Clinton a great leader? Which is great leader, this is not a great leader, right? But here's the case where the two choices, the person can't differentiate. So when they're asserting inherent existence, when they assert existence, Charnakirti can look into this supposedly, Ms. Gilbert will read, right? And see there's a pot that's existence and there's a pot that is inherent existence. You see? So it's only going to be from extremely subtle clues that you're going to be able to figure this out. You're going to be able to figure that existence means inherent existence. Now, how I got into all this is, I think the Bhāviveka's insistence on the syllogism is what suggests that in the system, he feels in the systems of the two parties debating, there's a valid cognition, they set forth a valid cognition that certifies the subject and so forth in a similar way. And that means that he doesn't have a sense of the real Madhyamaka view of emptiness. I admit I'm vague, despite all the years of work, it comes down to something vague. Well, unfortunately, there's no more time to discuss.
I thought that was kind of a slimy thing to go through, just because it seems like you could never then debate with anyone who's not in your system. Except, Yes.
It begins looking like that, especially with some of Chandrakirti's, with the discussion of, what sound means for Vaisheshika, what it means for a Buddhist. That mere sound, is that what you're debating on? So the claim is that there is mere sound that you could debate on, that the qualifications that the systems does put on what sound is are not part of the subject. And thus it is possible for two systems to debate. But certainly the problems with two systems debating is just that. I don't mean that by sound, you say, right? I don't mean that. You're reading things in. I don't believe what you believe about sound. So this is the point of working with the other person's assertions on their own ground.
Which is why we don't use syllogisms.
Why, you would think that that was the reason not to use syllogisms at all, except Nāgārjuna himself doesn't always use thal. So it's all slimy. It's like you think you get a hold of a fish, but it's a wave by the time you look down. And the study of this is like that. It's but I think the virtue of studying it is you get into, you are trying to get into the worldview, or you are using principles of the worldview more and more and more.
Do you know when the notion of snang developed in India?
Yes.
No.
Because it's clearly available in the earlier Nyaya materials. Use it in negating other systems. But it would seem that based on what Chandrakirti is saying, it's virtually impossible to use anything but a snang.
Yeah, but then Chandrakirti himself says, well, if you want a syllogism, here it is, right in his writing.
Right.
So it seems that Chandrakirti himself accepts syllogisms okay, and there's this 5-membered syllogism, and there's that 5-membered syllogism in it. It doesn't seem that he objects to syllogisms.
No.
Well, just maybe to using them in a debate with somebody from another system.
But this is a debate with somebody from another system. The Sankhya, in this case, the way he treats it.
Is it all right? Is there a distinction between autonomous syllogisms and just
Yes,
straight syllogisms?
that's the point. That in the autonomous syllogism, the members of the syllogism are being certified as being inherently existent. And in the other person's system, they're already taking it as being inherently existent, so how could they be then caused to see that they don't inherently exist?
But how do you distinguish an autonomous syllogism from a regular syllogism, from a non-autonomous syllogism?
I think it must be only by how the certification of it is asserted in your system.
So, from the point of view, if we read one, we couldn't say, oh, this is an autonomous syllogism.
No,
and that's just
there's
a
no way.
syllogism. There's no distinction
No.
structurally.
No, I don't think
It's
so.
only in the
No, I
context.
not only don't think so, there isn't.
So then Bhāviveka uses syllogisms or autonomous syllogisms?
Well, the claim by Gelupa scholars is that he's using autonomous syllogisms. There's only 2 places where he says, Rawandu Jesubakpa. He says Rawandu. But Rawandu may just mean my own syllogism.
From my own tradition.
Yeah, from my own point of view. So it's this, you see, this is where Trungta, or this kind of study, the way they do it, is not just to get some solid positions, but to break the sense of solidity there, and to go in and toss about in it. And you don't just toss about. Maybe. Yeah. Oh, I know what we're doing next time. The chart. We won't tell them. Okay. Yeah. they'll think we're gonna talk about the course.
It's been a whole new topic.
Yes. We're gonna do what we didn't do at the beginning, which is to go through the chart of existent phenomena. It is gonna be here, right?
It is
What is it gonna cost them all? $50 each?
at least.
Hmm.
Checks need to make the
You know, it says, before you study emptiness, you need to study what exists. We didn't do that. We started out with emptiness. So we're gonna finish with,
What it says.
going through what exists. This huge chart that I did, I think I did one in Dharamsala that must have gone, you know, from here to the end of the wall. And then I re-rendered it vertically in a shorter space and about like so, and that's the one I'm gonna use.